One of the biggest questions I get asked is, how do I deal with the uncertainty of my future? And it's a lot easier than you think. So we're gonna go into multiple things that you can do to deal with the stress and anxiety that you have from the uncertainty of your future. Now, let's get into the first thing. First thing is this: you've got to manage your perspective on the future. Now, most people think that life happens to them and the future will come to them. It happens from the outside in, right? Everyone's always looking at things from that perspective, when in reality, the perspective should be shifted towards you create your reality. You create your future. You can create your day. And so one of the ways that you can start doing that is by what I call the morning ask. And the morning ask is something that I do with my coaching clients, and I love it because it is so simple, it's same day, and it's effective. So it's two things. It's before you wake up in the morning and before your 2 feet hit the ground out of bed, when you're in that relaxed state where you're just waking up, first two things you want to ask yourself are this: what version of myself do I want to be today? In other words, do I want to be the kind and compassionate version of myself? Do I want to be the listener? Do I want to be the go-getter? Do I want to be the one that is laser focused? And what you don't often realize is that all the qualities and all the characteristics of a human being that are required for you to live the life you want or get to where you want to go are all characteristics that at some point you've exhibited. Now, the difference between someone who's considered disciplined versus someone's not is not whether they know what discipline is and not whether or not they've been disciplined. It's simply how disciplined have you been, right? All of us can be disciplined. I mean, if you had to be at a doctor's appointment at 11 a.m., you could show up at 11. If you had to do X, Y, or Z or get to a plane, you could be disciplined. If you had to get something done or else you lose your job, you can get something done. We've all been disciplined. We've all been focused. We've all done and experienced all the feelings and all the characteristics. It's a numbers game. It's a probability game. And so how do you control that probability and manage that probability? Through the morning ask. So you ask yourself, what version of myself do I want to be today? And that's identifying a characteristic trait that you want to embody, okay? And then secondly, you say to yourself, what feeling do I want to feel today? Because if you really think about life, everything we do is for a feeling. You know, if we buy an expensive house, it's to feel like we made it. It's to feel proud, accomplished. You know, if we go find someone to date, it's because we want to feel love. We want to feel connection. We always do things for a feeling. So every single morning for your morning ask yourself, what do I want to feel? And what version of myself do I want to be today? The second thing you want to do if you want to not feel so stressed and anxious about the uncertainty of your future is to think about the 3 places that you can spend your time throughout the day. So you have your future over here, you have the past over here. If you're too much in the future, okay, you're going to feel stress and anxiety, that uncertainty, the unknown, right? And then if you go too far into the past, you'll often feel a little frustrated, perhaps some regret. And oftentimes you'll keep replaying the emotions that are attached to the events of your past, and you'll feel kind of stuck. So these are 2 places that most people go and they don't feel so good. Obviously in this video, we're talking about the future, so we're going to focus on that, but it's important to know that there is this other space here, but there is a third space, and it is where the 2 intersect, which is right here, right now. You listening to the words coming out of my mouth and you hearing them with your ears in the present moment. You've heard the present moment before, but I have kind of a way that I look at the present moment, which is I try to be very aware of my surroundings. I try to be self-aware and mindful of my thoughts. I check in with myself and say, what's my vibe? Just asking yourself, what's your vibe is kind of like, hey, what are you feeling? And if you ask yourself what you're feeling, then oftentimes you can trace that back to a thought, and then that can trace you back to what you're focusing your energy and attention on. And then all of a sudden, you know why you're feeling the way you feel, okay? And so it's a very powerful process to get into that present moment because that's all we have, right? And so all we have is in the moment what we can control, and we can control what we focus on. If you want to focus far into the future, sure, there's nothing you can predict. You can't predict the future, right? But you can create it. So always manage your focus. Are you focusing too far forward, too far back, or boom, on the present moment? Another thing you can do is simply manage your narrative around the future. So for me, I get excited for the unknown. Now, let's even break this down on a day-to-day basis. So for example, today, I have already worked on my morning ask, so I'm already up. But I don't know exactly how my day is going to go. So some of it I'm looking to create through intention, which is within my control, which is very important, right? Because you don't want to worry about things in the future you can't control. Like, is my husband going to leave me? Is my job going to fire me? There are some things that can be influenced by you, but not in actuality controlled by you. So the word acceptance is one I use. I accept that if I lose my job tomorrow, I'm not going to resist it because I can't control it, right? And so the word acceptance is super huge and is one that I use all the time because I accept. Like if I try to do something today that doesn't work, I accept that failure. That doesn't mean I'm happy with it. That doesn't mean that's what I want. It just means that I'm not resistant to it, because if you're resistant to it, that's where that emotional response comes of anger, guilt, humiliation, embarrassment, whatever it is, right? If I say, hey, I tried, it didn't work, instead of judging myself and feeling all the negative lower vibe emotions associated with failure or mistakes or who knows what, I let those emotions come. I accept them, meaning like I sit with them for a moment and I say, okay, just like a river, I say, oh, thanks for stopping by. I had this experience and you're all set. Let's go. I'm shifting my focus. I'm moving forward, right? You'd be surprised at how much when you remove your attachment to emotions and your attachment to the experiences, especially the painful ones, when you on a forward, kind of like in a proactive approach, let's say, instead of attaching this strong emotion to things that go wrong, I accept them. And then what happens is I don't have anything that I have to let go from, right? Because half of the time, most of us are working on trying to let go from the emotions of our past. Well, you can only let go from the emotions of your past if in the present you have an experience that you tag with this strong, heavy emotion that like weighs on your shoulders and weighs on your mind. If you just manage that on the front end, then there's nothing to let go from because there's nothing attached to it, which of course is that emotion. So manage the emotions that you place on the events. And when you start to accept things and you don't resist them and you bring the acceptance in and let them flow through you, it is a very powerful way to manage your emotions, especially reduce stress and anxiety around the future and even any things that pop up along that journey that we're all on together. Let's talk about another way that you can deal with the unknown and the uncertainty of your future and reduce that stress and anxiety associated with it. One of the things that I like to do, and whenever I'm coaching people, I always bring up this story, is if you think about it, we have evolved, like technology and the way we think has evolved, but our true genes and the guts of who we are is still back in the Neanderthal days with many of the things that we deal with. Now, back in the day, if you're in a tribe of 20 Neanderthals, everything came down to energy. Where are we going to get our next meal? And that was huge because if you couldn't get food and sustenance, water, food, and just keep the tribe alive, you're done, right? And so survival was huge for us. So deep down in our deepest genes is this survival mechanism, this desire to survive, which is what creates the fear around the unknown, around the future, that anxiety. And that unknown that we all have is based on us not knowing, is our next meal going to come if we go to the west or if we come to the east? And so it's not knowing what's around the next corner. Are we going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, or are we going to find a whole bunch of blueberries and grapes and a nice lake to shower in? Okay, so if you start to realize that it's part of who we are, and the uncertainty of the future is just part of our body trying to protect itself and keep itself alive, I just really feel that for me personally, that kind of puts a frame around things where I say, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to fight this. I'm not going to judge myself or criticize myself for being freaked out about the future. I'm going to realize that that's genetic code just trying to transcribe itself and keep me alive. But guess what? I'm not here to survive. I've got that covered. I'm here to thrive. And that is the frame that I have from looking back in the Neanderthal days. So try that out as well. And finally, one of my favorite ways to deal with the uncertainty of the future is to imagine the future I desire. Our greatest gift that we very, very rarely use is the gift of the human imagination. If you think about it, of all the mammals, animals, insects, whatever's out there, we have the gift to make decisions. We have the gift of human imagination. We have this frontal cortex, this prefrontal cortex that is amazing. And so let's use it to our advantage. So instead of worrying or being anxious about the future and thinking about everything that could go wrong, I start to imagine the future that I want to enjoy and to live. And what's interesting is as I start to imagine the future, it starts to filter out all the things, because that's the way the mind works. We have that reticular activating system where when you focus on something, it removes all the things that aren't in alignment with that, right? And so when you start to imagine the future the way you want it to be, you start to see it more clearly, you start to get excited. So now all of a sudden the feelings of anxiety and stress for the future start to reduce, and they're replaced instead with feelings of excitement and anticipation, and realizing that, hey, I'm imagining this thing coming true. And you know what? The more clear I see it, the more real it feels, and the more belief I have in myself and my ability to turn that which I imagine into reality, the more excited I am. Boom. Now all of a sudden you've shifted your perspective and your emotions, your focus, and you've completely changed your state, your emotional state, and the way you feel, and also your narrative and story around uncertainty and the unknown in the future. So use those tools. You got this.